Hey everyone, welcome to Cuberviews episode 30. This is your host Ian Braverman. I hope you're having a great spring day. Today I am joined by Parker LaMascus. How are you doing today?
Hey Ian, I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
I'm excited to have you on. We've met at a few different Cube events. Like I think the most recent Cube event that we were both at was Cube for a Cause, right?
In February, I believe so. Yeah.
Yes, that was a lot of fun. How did you like that event?
I had a great time. I was bringing a newer cube to that event, and so it was fun to test, but then also always fun to visit New York and my friends there.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I definitely
yeah,
plan on going again. It's going to be a lot
great
of
cube
fun.
city. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So, random shout out if you happen to be going to Cube for a Cause again later this year. It's a great event. And yeah, I'm excited to be talking with you today. I have been listening to Lucky Paper Radio for a long time. It's always a fun time to hear you on Lucky Paper Radio, especially like the set reviews and reviewing the cube surveys. You're also the designer of multiple cubes like Atavis, Theseus, and the cube we're going to be talking about today, Pulp Nouveau, which I had a chance to draft once before and had a lot of fun with. So introduce yourself, Parker.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction. I am the editor of Lucky Paper, the website. And as you mentioned, I do frequently appear on the podcast as well. I've been playing Magic since 2012, the Return to Ravnica block. And I've been playing Cube since 2018 or so, since roughly the last year of my college career. I've been all in on Cube once I kind of discovered that format.
Very cool. And what about Cube really brought you into it?
Well, part of it was the ability to have something to think about and fiddle with and like distract me from, the vicissitudes of everyday life. But then after years really of really using Cube like a fidget toy or like something to entertain myself at a bit of a boring job that I had. And also after the pandemic, when Cube for me functioned as a way to stay sane during lockdown, after that, I really began to play with other people in my city, Philadelphia. At that point, I realized, oh, Cube has been all these other things to me in the past, but now it is a way for me to bring friends together and make friends and meet friends and kind of welcome other people. And often when other people come and meet strangers for the first time, it's nice to have something like magic that's a shared language and a shared system of values and meaning puts them at ease, and it is a good foundation for a community. So at this point, Cube for me is really like just the way that I interact with a lot of my friends. And it's not exactly how I started Cube, but it's where I am now, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
I totally agree. Get to go out and hang out with all the people at the weekly Cube night, or how often you get to play
hmm
Cube. I know in Baltimore they have like the 40 person every week Cube event, which is huge.
Yeah. In Philly, we have been cubing every week for going on 3 years, and we're starting to have 20 people, 24 people, and drafting three full pods of eight every week, which has not always been the case. We've had our fair share of weeks with, five or 11, some of the most awkward numbers, but we've grown a lot and kind of almost hit a critical mass where suddenly people are like planning to spend every Wednesday going to Cube, and it's a fun time.
I totally agree. And I mention every week if you happen to be in the area of Games IRL, Avon, Connecticut, we're always looking for more cubers to come join us at our weekly Cube meetup. So definitely, if you're in the area, come check us out. And I have a question for you. So, what formats did you play before Cube?
Before I answer that, I want to say how awesome it is that you are 30 episodes into a podcast to advertise a local group. It's so sweet. And like, if someone does come, that's awesome. So I applaud the effort. And I know it's not just an advertisement, but it's a funny idea. Before I played Cube, I did a little bit of like kitchen table modern, and I'm talking like really kitchen table. Actually, relevant to today, I had a brief hiatus and then I came back during Shadows over Innistrad block. The thing that brought me back was Falconwrath Gorger, which is a vampire that grants all of your other vampires madness. And so I had a madness deck that also had madness cards from Time Spiral block. We're talking Call of the Netherworld or Call 2. We're talking Dark Withering. And so it was like this vampire deck with madness. And I was extremely proud of it. And it was so fun to play. I guess it was modern legal, but not modern playable. Far cry from it. I didn't own a lightning bolt until I started collecting 4 cube.
Who needs Lightning Bolt when you got Fiery Temper?
Hey, that's right. And Alms of the Vein, too, which is like a lightning helix that only hits the opponent, but it costs a single black mana if you madness it. It had a lot of burn to it, which is hilarious, but it was not good.
That sounds like such a fun deck. I love trying to throw in madness and whatever cube I can, like my Rakdos cube. It's just a ton of fun. It adds a whole other access to the game.
Hmm.
And speaking of madness and the darkness and the scary areas and the alleyways, we're talking about the Pulp Nouveau cube today. Tell me about this cube.
Yeah, so Pulp Nouveau is a cube that I designed a couple years ago, partly, and I'm sure we'll get into the history a little bit, but at the high level, what I tell drafters is that this is a cube full of cards that I love that speak to a theme of like Gilded Age prosperity and also Gilded Age depravity. So the age of exploration, but also the age of nasty surprises and monsters lurking just out of sight. This is a cube where it's really easy to be greedy and selfish and depraved, I guess. And that means black mana comes really readily available to players. If you want to be virtuous or you want to be, passionate or natural, some of these other colors of mana, you can do that, but you're going to have to work for it. And so Pulp Nouveau is a cube where the only freely available basic lands are swamps. All the other lands must be drafted, including the basics of the non-black colors.
Yeah, that's a ton of fun. And before we jump into it further, tell me about some of your hobbies outside of Magic and what do you do for work?
So outside of Magic, I like to read and I like to write. Today I went bird watching a little bit. Yeah, I also try to avoid sports, but when I do, I prefer ultimate frisbee. So
Did you see any cool birds today?
not today. I was really focused on the azaleas that are in full bloom this time of year. Yesterday, I saw an eastern towhee for the first time and also a blue-gray gnatcatcher. These are not exactly, kind of the common slots of the bird booster packs, but yeah, it was a first for me, and so I enjoyed seeing them.
Audio listeners, go check out those birds.
Hmm.
Yeah, I have my pet bird, so I was hanging out with my bird all day today. So we were both hanging out with birds today.
Cool. What kind of bird do you have?
I have a dusky conure.
Okay, I'll have to look that up. It sounds
Yeah,
exotic.
mine doesn't have a lot of feathers, so he's a little weird.
Well,
And
neither do I, so maybe we can bond over that.
yes, we're both featherless.
Hmm.
And so this cube, it has, we were talking about it before the show, so I might mess up how to say it. The chiaroscuro tones of New Capenna and Strixhaven and the article metropolitan feel. What about those two sets were so interesting to you?
Yeah, so Pulp Nouveau kind of began as a collection of cards that either wouldn't fit into what I considered at the time my primary cube, Theseus, or cards that were laying around from this, red black madness deck that I mentioned earlier, or cards that at the time I was drafting pretty heavily, just retail limited. And so I was just picking up a bunch of cards that I loved. And sometimes I had a great time building a deck with them, but I didn't have a home for them. And so I put all these cards together and then I realized, wait, it happens to be that I've got a lot of new Capenna cards here and I've got a lot of Strixhaven and a lot of Modern Horizons 2. These were, some of the newest sets at the time. And then my challenge became, I don't want to just have a cards I like cube, which, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's how most of my cubes have begun. But there is a question of branding, right? If I show up to Cube Night, and this time I was cubing on a weekly basis, it was like, how do I get people excited to play this? And so that was a little bit front of mind. And the way I did that was I looked at these cards and I realized, you know what? If you combine some of the Indiana Jones vibes of Strixhaven with the lesson learned, he's an archaeologist, he's a professor, you get it. And I combine that with the Art Deco basic lands of New Capenna and, some of the angels and demons of that set that are heavily inspired by both the Art Deco aesthetic and then also turn of the century prohibition and that kind of thing. If I combine those, then what I'm left with is something that feels a lot like really bad genre fiction or like gumshoe detective movies, black and white, The Maltese Falcon, Agatha Christie, and Arthur Conan Doyle and H.P. Lovecraft and weird tales of all kinds, right? So this kind of mix of theme It's certainly pastiche and like, a little bit cheesy and pulpy, but I thought might as well lean into that. And then the name Pulp Nouveau was born, and very quickly I started to try to marry together the mechanics that I liked and the theme.
Does everyone wear detective hats in the set?
No. And partly, I know Murders of Karlov Manor then came out and like is playing in a very similar genre space, but actually I really love like the Indiana Jones Adventures 2, right? Which is a different kind of hat. I guess he always wears a fedora, but I know that Magic has since started to explore this trope space, but for me, I liked it for slightly different reasons, and then also tried to infuse from the beginning, more or less, this undercurrent of horror to the set. And so if you look through the list, you'll notice a few Eldrazi and a few kind of creatures of the night, I guess, vampires, demons, and occasionally a dragon or two. And this is like an age of exploration and an age of mystery in the world of Pulp Nouveau, but monstrosity and like kind of the dark underbelly of the Gilded Age is never far away.
I'm certain we'll get an Indiana Jones secret lair eventually.
Ooh, I hope not. We've already gotten Lara Croft Tomb Raider,
That's
and
true.
it's just a little on the nose. I do love tomb raiding cards in this set. In fact, I think I am currently on Goblin Tomb Raider at least, which is just like right there in the name. Even though Lara Croft does exist, I just have no interest in it.
Yeah. And I really like this one quote on your Cube Cover page that you have. I want to read it here.
Sure.
In this lousy town, greed is the only currency, and rap sheets are a badge of pride. Even the ill-gotten loot wants payback. You're here chasing stories of ancient riches and slumbering fiends. I'll tell you to watch your back if you want to get out alive, let alone rich, but frankly, I'd be wasting my breath.
You
Now
know,
that puts you in the mind.
yeah, I love the accent, and also I know it's a visual medium, but boy, those Italian hand gestures were just awesome. I'm very intimidated by that reading. Uh, so this is, I firmly believe that cube overviews are useless, and I want my drafters to like get the bare minimum of information, but mostly I'm trying to pitch them on playing this cube and getting the vibe, right? And so that's really just me having a little bit of fun as a writer, but also trying to communicate the vibe of the cube so that players are like, oh, I might not know what's going on. I might not know what's good, but this is not just a mechanical experience. It's also a thematic and storytelling experience through mechanics.
Absolutely. And you wrote a really awesome article that I had a great time reading for this cube on the Lucky Paper Radio website. And it sounds like you drew a lot of different inspirations, especially from like the Amankar Desert Cube, which hooked you on the idea of a desert cube. What about that cube hooked you so much?
Yeah, this was in 2022. I was at CubeCon, and this was the first CubeCon, and I was playing the Amankar Desert Cube by Judge Bones.
Shout out to Judge Bones.
Yeah, fellow Okie. And as I started to play this cube, not only was the draft really compelling because you had to weigh basic lands in some cases versus spells. And so it threw into sharp contrast. If I can't cast this bomb, even though it is a bomb, it's not responsible for me to take it. And that kind of interplay between responsible decision making and also ensuring that my deck was consistent enough was really awesome. Then the second thing that happened is that as I drafted cards to kind of mitigate the drawback of the mana base, right? So I'm talking like 1 mana cycling, 2 mana cycling, looting effects and discard effects so that I can dig my way out of Mana Screw or out of Mana Flood because my lands weren't very strong or even in my full control. I was just having to pick what was coming to me. As this was happening, I realized this is really dialing up the importance of synergy in my deck. So yes, I have a cycling card in order to help me, like its main reason for being there is to avoid Mana Screw because this Desert Cube is ripe for a lot of Mana Screw in my games. But if I can trigger that, like if I reference this deck list that's in the article, Iron Crag Pyromancer was an effect that would let me not only use cycling to fix my mana, but also in the late game, turn that into an engine and allow me to convert that on that synergy. So I found that to be really compelling mixture. And not only that draft, but also like earlier that summer, I had drafted a cube called the Graveyard Combo Cube by a Riptide Lab user named Insco. I had a similar experience of like this mix of quote unquote medium power or whatever. That's kind of a vague phrase, but something that's operating below the peaks of power level really allows synergy to shine in a different way than I'd experienced before. And so with this desert cube threw that phenomenon into even sharper relief. And I was like, I want to try this as a designer.
I totally agree. I think desert cubes are so fun because you can't just get basics from the basic box, of course. So you're forced to take lands, and you might as well make those lands thematic and interesting for the cube environment itself. So if
Hmm.
anything, the lands automatically become an extension, the archetypes and synergies you're trying to build upon.
Yeah, really tying that resource system in Magic to the other synergies that your deck is producing and not taking it for granted that the resources will work themselves out.
Yeah. And this cube, though, is not a normal desert cube. Like you mentioned, you have access to basic swamps at the end of the draft, not no basic lands. And this is similar to a few cubes I've seen or played, like the Devoid cube by Dan Schneider, that you can only get waste at the end. And I've actually played a couple other cubes where, for example, one guy in my local game store, Matt Bunko, had a mono white cube where you were only given access to planes at the end of the draft, but you could splash into other colors through lands, and that cube is such a blast. I wish that he came to the store more often. I could draft that cube again. That was years
Mm.
ago. And also another guy, Tom Davies, at my store had a mono blue cube where you could draft cards outside of the blue color. So tell me about the differences in gameplay and drafting experience for when you get no basic lands compared to one color.
Yeah, so this really emerged number one out of the theme. Once I started picking all my favorite cards, I realized they're all black, and also all of the like pulpy and Art Deco-y cards that I liked were all black. And I was like, oh no, do I cut white? What do I do? And once I kind of married that to the desert mechanic, I realized, oh, I also don't really want to bring this cube to my local play group and have people draft mana bases that just don't work, right? It can be fun to have the stress of if you draft wrong, then you literally just can't play the game of Magic, but not everybody finds that to be fun. And so I did want to kind of put up those, I don't know, safety nets
Yeah,
for
make a
my
safety
draft.
valve or something.
Exactly. And then also it let me kind of double down on the theme of this cube. So as a drafter coming into Pulp, kind of my first instinct is, oh, black picks are almost free. Like a mono black card is almost free for me. Any other color comes with at least one extra pick because you have to draft the basic or the fixing lands to make that pick happen. And so that drives demand for black. And actually, this was an echo of one of my favorite draft formats that I've had the experience of playing, which is Midnight Hunt. Midnight Hunt is nominally color balanced, but very quickly in that format's life cycle, it was discovered that black and blue were far and above better than other colors. And so that drove this unequal demand for black that made the draft dynamic unique and fun, and the gameplay was awesome too. Those three things together kind of led to this dynamic. I knew it would work out okay because Torment has existed and formats like Midnight Hunt have existed. A little bit of color balance never hurt anyone. Imbalance, I guess.
And that's one thing I really wanted to ask you about, which is really interesting about this cube is while you only get access to swamps at the end of the draft, I think most people would imagine, oh, if you only get access to swamps at the end, there must be a really highly larger proportion of black cards. But really, it's pretty balanced overall. Like looking at the cube section, black has 65 cards. And then the other colors have, for example, white, red, green, blue around between 35 and 40. And while there is still a definitely larger percentage of black multicolor cards, like Demir having eight, Rakdos having seven, Orzhov having six, there are definitely non-black multicolors that have a lot of cards. Like Simic has six of them. With it being you only get access to swamps at the end of the draft, but having many colors, not just black being really represented in this cube, does the black dry up quickly and is it really contested? What do decks end up looking like?
Yeah, so it is the case that there's not so many more black cards than the other colors. And black should be, I think, contested pretty highly. Of course, the danger then is either players are all fighting over black, or like one player becomes mono black or something, and they're not really forced to engage with the central conceit of drafting your lands. Or on the other hand, players don't pick any black cards and aren't engaging in the central conceit in another way, which is playing black. And so my goal here is to kind of build a black section which implies the necessity of other colors, but also a black section with generic effects that should go in every deck to pull non-black drafters into black. So it's kind of a push and pull. Pulling drafters into black is easy because black has really good removal. So I run a lot of black removal spells, and I intend for most drafters to get their removal at least partly from black. And this was also the case in the Midnight Hunt draft format, and so it was, something that I knew could work. At the same time, I'm hoping to push players out of black, and so that's what the big black adjacent gold sections do. If you want a premium removal spell like Putrefy or Mortify or Unlicensed Disintegration, you can get those, but you have to add another color to your deck. And so you have to engage with the central conceit, right? Even the black threats, I don't really think that black has enough threats to make an aggro deck by itself. Like, you can build half of an aggro deck, but it would really be nice if you could branch out into red and take advantage of some face burn, or branch out into white and take advantage of some late game flying, right? And so there's a lot of like A's of A plus B synergies, but there's not a lot of B's. Peanut butter and chocolate would be a better thing. Black has all the chocolate, but none of the peanut butter is the goal, at least.
That's a really interesting dichotomy to have, and I definitely felt that. So I had a chance to draft this cube recently, and I went a blue-white tempo deck. It was a really interesting push and pull in this draft format, like you said, because it's safer to go black because you have access to as many swamps as you want, but black becomes pretty contested pretty quickly and starts to dry up fast because everyone has the same thought. I could stay black and
Right.
then I can focus on taking non-lands. But if the black is really starting to dry up and maybe you want access to these really strong non-black multicolor cards that give you maybe some power outliers or really interesting effects, then you could avoid black altogether, like I did, where I had like a blue-white tempo deck. But at the same time, then I had to focus a lot of energy on land picks that people in black didn't have to focus on. So I think
Mm.
it created a really interesting feeling of I want to stay in black so that I don't have to focus as much on the lands. But if I get away from black, then there's less of a chance that I'm being cut off and I might find a lane that's completely open.
Yeah. I've actually seen a literal mono red deck in this cube before. Um,
Wow.
it was crazy. And it did have to play like a couple of Sulphurous Springs as mono red lands. And so it wasn't, I think, really taking advantage of its mana base. But these things are known to happen. It's maybe not something I explicitly designed that players would build non-black decks, but I don't mind. And in fact, I celebrate it because it makes drafters feel like they've really achieved something. Every time it's happened, I think the person who's done it has been very excited and like wanted to brag to me about their unique draft, which I love because it lets them feel like a winner even before the game starts. I love that. And then if the deck works, then hey, even better. And maybe it will teach the other players next time to draft their lands a little more highly. And it will kind of feed back into the central conceit of picking between lands and spells. It also is the case that when somebody at the table is picking a ton of fixing lands to make a non-black deck work, that makes the other players, it puts a little bit of pressure on them to engage and fight over black more. And so I think it's still fun for the other players to have one deck like that at the table. I haven't seen two of such decks come out of the same draft pod. It's normally the kind of thing that one very motivated drafter can make happen, but probably not two.
Yeah, like I had a blue-white deck and I was really excited about it. I said, oh my
Hmm.
gosh, I have no swamps in my deck. And my colors felt totally open, which makes sense because it's pretty hard to play Azorius cards when I'm taking all the blue-white lands from you.
Right.
And another really cool part about this queue that I like is the duplicates. On a recent episode with Bones that we mentioned earlier, episode 25, we discussed how he is a believer in why have strictly worse versions of cards and not just have duplicates of the cards you actually want to fit your goals? Like, if you're a cube like the Museum of Modern that's trying to replicate modern magic, just put in the four lightning bolts instead of the searing spear and the
Hmm.
incinerate and the cards that just feel bad to play. And I can see that you've definitely taken on that approach. Like you have four Price of Fame, which I think is really awesome because not only is it a flavorful pick, it fits perfectly into the flavor, but also mechanically, like the Surveil, putting things in the graveyard, also like
Hmm.
Tragic Fall, another really great flavor feeling. And then with the Madness cards, if you get Hellbent, it becomes extremely powerful. Tell me about the duplicates in this cube more.
I think broadly, we have this legacy going back 20 or more years of Cube being singleton. Partly because it was a way to show off your collection if you had one each of the Power Nine or whatever, and one of all of the other most famous and most expensive cards or whatever you want to show off. And then it also started to feed back with like Commander or whatever. And it was like, why have two of these? For me, I feel slightly differently about it, which is especially spells that resolve and then go straight to the graveyard, instants and sorceries. These are things which don't need to take up very much brain space. They shouldn't, maybe, especially when drafters are already bending their brain into knots trying to think about this desert draft and also read a bunch of cards that they've never read that have Art Deco art or whatever. And they're like, how does this fit into the theme? Also, how does the mechanic work? And also, do I have enough lands? At that point, I want them to be able to look at a removal spell in the pack and be like, oh, I already know what that does. I already read it once. So it just cuts down on reading. That's part of it. And this is a cube that is already taxing your brain a lot. Another thing that this helps is reinforce the theme. And so when I play two of a card, it's just twice the chance for that art to show up or for that mechanical story. A big one here is Professor of Symbology. This is a one and a white for a 2/1 that enters the battlefield and learns. This is Indiana Jones, right? This is the card Indiana Jones, as far as I'm concerned. And so it's important to have two of those just to get the flavor across, number one. And then number two, the learn is extremely relevant in this environment. There's a lot of lesson cards to fetch with it. That's one of the things I love the most about Strixhaven. And then also you can always discard a madness card to the learn effect, which is another kind of sideways benefit. Or you could discard a reanimate threat. This is the kind of thing that like it fits a mechanical niche that really nothing else does. Even if I had another looting effect, it wouldn't be a learn effect, and that's what I really want. And then also it fits this flavor niche. So I'm really looking for those cards that are pillars or something that I want to just show up more often.
Yeah, and I totally agree with the part about the lesson learned. There's only so many lesson learned cards, and
Right.
if you want to make it a theme, I think you basically have to really duplicate them. And I
Yeah.
think that that was a really fun mechanic. Environmental sciences, I love going five color poop and draft, and that card is perfect. It gains you life, so you survive, and it finds a basic land. It's so powerful.
Right. But in this format, it takes on a little bit of additional context where, like, I've seen people main deck in environmental science if their desert draft doesn't go very well.
Oh, yeah.
And so, again, tying the resource system of Magic more directly to the mechanics, environmental science is a card I play four of in this list. It's because it's just so important to the central theme of the format and then also ties together the room in terms of the second order synergies.
Yeah, that's smart. I totally didn't even think about that. Yeah, because it's a desert cube, being able to find you those lands is really powerful, especially the basic lands you got from other colors. That's really cool.
Actually, Learn has another mode, right? It's not just finding your environmental sciences to find a land. It's not just finding your mascot exhibition to close out the game or discarding your madness card in this format. Sometimes you also just rummage to try and hit a land that you might need. I was really just trying to use every part of the buffalo in terms of the learn mechanic. And that's kind of what formed my web of synergies as far as the mechanics of this format went.
Yeah. And tell me more about the archetype and theme design in this cube. With it being mostly mono black, that you get only swamps at the end of the draft, were the archetypes and themes focused around black? Or, for example, did you put on-purpose archetypes into colors that don't include black that wouldn't get drafted as often, like blue-white. Did you purposely put in a blue-white archetype or just have it be more focused on if you play black and blue and white?
Hmm. It's a good question. I tend to go for a cards first type of archetype design. I had Learn and I had Madness, but those are really just kind of bread and butter mechanics in some ways. Just because I have 5 Learn cards in my deck, you don't even know what colors those are because Learn is in all 5. Madness is kind of the same way. Like if my Madness cards are all Fiery Temper, that's a very different deck than if they're all the counterspell whose name I forget.
Circular logic?
Yeah, that's the one. It's actually just right in front of me and I didn't see it. I'm really looking for cool cards. If those cards tie together other cards and make them have a new context, that's a real bonus. Maybe the first instance of this was that I was playing Unearth, partly because it was a cycling card. And then I realized, wait, I have an opportunity here to play Scab Ruinator, one of my favorite cards of all time. It's a 3 mana 5/6 flying that as an additional cost you have to exile 3 other creatures from your graveyard. But if you're unearthing, then you can just do it on turn 3, 2 even. And so once I realized that that was possible, I was like, oh, maybe I'll support this a little more. And I added Sarah Avenger as another example of this. And I added the recommission effects in white. So, I started leaning into it once I kind of realized the emergent complexity. Another example would be there are some Emerge Eldrazi in this list. And that's again to kind of communicate the undercurrent of horror that was present in Gilded Age politics, but also in the fiction of the time. And then I was like, you know what goes pretty well with that? Birthing pod effects. So really what I'm trying to do is just seed in some aspirational cards that make people feel good about committing to a synergy, that make people reconsider their draft picks. I don't really have a laid out agenda or a plan as far as the archetypes go. I'm just trying to follow the cool cards.
So you get Ghoul Tree out and you make it
Yeah,
only cost 1 green mana.
that's
And
right.
then you birthing pot it away because it costs 8 into a 9 drop, and you find your Drown Yard Behemoth, which is a 5/7 as long as it has hexproof if it entered this turn.
Yeah. And then eventually you can work your way up to Shadow of Mortality at the
Yes.
15 mana slot. I'm kidding. I don't think there's a 15 mana.
Do we have a 14 mana creature we can pot away?
I really don't think so. But, like, I don't actually know. And that's kind of a fun thing for me is like not really knowing what's possible in this cube and letting people discover that along with me.
Scott Ruinator. Wasn't that like one of like the biggest specs and people thought it was going to be insanely powerful and then it was
This
awful?
was before my time, so I actually don't know. I picked it up secondhand, but it is so swaggy, like
Yeah.
just incredible. And
It's
so
Escape before Escape was good.
yeah, and I'm also playing self mill, and so it's possible to read this on level 1 and be like, oh, maybe I can make this happen with a bunch of creatures in my deck, and I hope that that is the case, right? But then you can also, if you see the unearth later, then you're like, feels like a galaxy brain moment, and it feels like a really cool unlock. So that's kind of the hope, and I've just really tried to layer as many of those kinds of moments as I can. Another one I'm really proud of is Kalia of the Vast.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
Commander legend, right? And I don't mean that in a game text sense. I mean, she's legendary for how cool she is in Commander, an OG, right? And I think a Kalia deck is possible in this cube. Now, I've never seen it and I've never seen it win necessarily, but that's beside the point. It's a dream to chase and it feels so cool. It will lead you to a Mardu aggro deck that is, I think, viable in the first place. You're not cheating out 8 mana dragons, you're cheating out 5 mana angels. But I think that's still enough in 2-player 20 life formats.
I'm such a fan of putting in these dream cards that, hey, someday somebody will achieve this, and then I might take it out of the cube.
Yeah, and it'll be the coolest thing ever for the draft that it exists. It's the kind of card where it makes me want to abandon all my prior picks and be like, oh, I'm pivoting to Kalia now. Yeah, I was really looking for these aspirational cards that make you feel something when you look at them.
Yes, totally. That's a lot of fun. And another part of this cube that's interesting is the hate pieces. I always think it's really interesting when cube designers put like almost sideboard cards. For example, you have Containment Priest in here,
Mm.
which is one and a white flash. If a non-token creature would enter, it wasn't cast, exile instead. Now, this is how you get the person who's trying to bring back their Scab Ruinator with their recommission.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah.
Also,
Honestly,
like Thalia, making their non-creature spells one more, or this one I'd never seen before, which is a really funny card. The Raven Heretic, which is a one and a white 2/2, then you can just tap it to exile a creature from a graveyard.
yeah. So Containment Priest exists partly because there's a reanimate deck, and I'll talk more about that in a second, and partly because it's a cleric, and there are a couple of party effects in this cube.
Oh,
Most notably, Thwart the Grave. It was one of these cards that I loved, but didn't have a cube home for. So yeah, partly it's just a cleric and like a 2/2 flash. And in this cube, that power level is like a little below rate, maybe, but not embarrassing. So, I'm hoping that that's enough. But then also, with the reanimate package in this cube, we're talking about reanimating for about 4 mana, 4 to 5 mana. And the threat that you're reanimating is not a win the game instantly threat. It's a we're going to play for another 3 or 4 turns threat. I think the best of them is Thraxamundar, another OG, an extremely cool card, not that strong of a reanimation target. Like it would get laughed out of, most quote unquote unpowered cubes.
I won't
Um,
laugh at you. I like that card.
well, thank you. Here, it's very strong, I think, but I still want to enable counterplay. And a couple ways that I do that is by quadrupling up on Price of Fame, for instance, which is really good against legends, cheap legends, and really good against a reanimated threat. But it's not actually super mana efficient versus most reanimated threats, excepting Thraxamundar, ironically. And so that helps the reanimation player not be like totally locked to win, but also if their thing gets removed, they have a chance to maybe fight back or reanimate it again and they're not sunk, right? So that's part of the counterplay. And then another part of the counterplay is like Thraben Heretic. Yes, it's a wizard for the party. And yes, it's a human in case that type matters. But also, it's got a modest graveyard hate effect. It's not going to turn you off of Delirium by itself necessarily, because there will often be other types or more creatures than it can practically exile. But it's not like dead on board to reanimate. I want players to have the tools, in other words, but I want there to be a back and forth. I'm not trying to just like annihilate the reanimate player with a Swords to Plowshares or a nuke your graveyard. Scavenging Ooze was too strong here as another example. I did try it, but it was just too good.
Scavenging Ooze is an insane card.
It's really strong and was kind of like munching on things that I wanted to be good, like Unearth. Here, I'm not talking about the spell, I'm talking about the ability. But this kind of thing is like, yeah, I want the graveyard to be valuable here. And Scavenging is just kind of dumpstered those decks, or those synergies at least.
And speaking more about removal, one thing that's really interesting about the write-up that you wrote, and I'd never seen anything like this before, was you made a removal chart.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's anything that screams I'm like a engineer or software engineer, is this chart. So it has different mana values on it. And then it also has what for each of those mana values should the removal be able to hit or what it should
Yeah.
do. Tell me about this chart. Like, for example, one mana value removal should not be able to kill things that cost 5. Like you were just mentioning, Swords to
Right.
Plowshares in here. But then once you get to 3+, it can hit anything. But then you get even more upside over time as the mana value goes up.
Yeah. So this is a symptom of, or maybe a result of the famous Baneslayer versus Moldrifter, right? And, when you hear people use and abuse that cliche, it's often because Baneslayer dies to Doomblade, quote unquote, which is not to say that Baneslayer is bad, right? It does win games when it doesn't die to Doomblade. And the problem is that Doomblade answers Baneslayer Angel for tempo advantage of 3 mana, right? And so you're able to play your Doomblade, kill their 5 mana threat that they spent their whole turn on. It's kind of a time walk or whatever. And then you also get to deploy your own 3 mana threat that their Doomblade won't answer as effectively. It shapes the texture of games because it shapes how easily you can get ahead for a removal spell. And then it also shapes the texture of the threats. What is it that constitutes a game ending threat? Or what is it that is a safe threat? Have we compressed the format so much that you don't feel safe even when you play Ragavan for 1 mana? Or is this a format that has a little more room to breathe? And because I also did duplicate so many effects, especially in my removal suites, I was able to kind of game this out in a way that I'm not always able to do in a purely singleton cube. And so, my two biggest removal spells are Tragic Fall at 2 mana and then Price of Fame at 2/4 mana. Price of Fame kills anything. And so, including a reanimated threat, including something that the opponent invested 5 mana into, or 5 mana in two creatures in the case of a merge. And so, my goal is that Price of Fame doesn't feel overwhelming. Tragic Fall, mostly, if you're not hellbent, it mostly kills small things that you didn't spend too much mana on. And so, it's not a huge deal to have your 2 mana beat stick killed at a tempo parity. If you do manage to make it -13 for Tragic Fall, you had to spend a lot of equity to do that. You had to plan ahead for several turns in order to make sure that you're hellbent, or you need to be in a top deck war where you might as well have drawn a 5 mana thing. It just happened to be a 2 mana thing. And then the third kind of piece of that puzzle is a card like Mortify or Putrefy or, the other gold cards. These are 3 mana unconditional removal, but you have to commit to a second color. And so you have to invest in the draft in order to make that happen. And so my goal here, and as I built that table, it was to make sure that threats at each mana value felt satisfying in the face of removal, even if they didn't have like a Muldrifter, ETB, or other kinds of residual or instant value.
Yeah, I think that's such a refreshing take to hear. I feel that especially in lower power cubes that might be going for a really big thematic theme or flavor theme like this cube, I feel like it's so easy to just default to putting in the best removal spells every time.
Mm-hmm.
Where, hey, I have my low power, fun, flavorful cube, but I'll just throw in Counterspell and Swords to Plowshares and Lightning Bolt because it's easy. It's what I already have or what players already know. But it really does play to the texture of the draft, like you were saying. If I want to play Thraxamundar, which
Mm-hmm.
is awesome, and it's kind of a Bolt Drifter because when you get the attack, you get the sacrifice.
It has haste, yeah.
But if I play that and immediately get Swords to Plowshares, I'm going to come up to you after the draft and be like, what the heck? What's
Yeah.
going on here? And then it also becomes a question of if the removal is so powerful, it's always going to be a pack one, pick one. I think it's so boring when I put a
Mm-hmm.
pack one, pick one and somebody says, of course you take Swords to Plowshares. It's just the removal is so much more powerful than the rest of the threats in the cube.
Yeah. And when you're playing at this space that is very explicitly not at the peaks of power level, it can feel a little, honestly, like bewildering to be like, these cool synergistic cards, the Scob Ruinator, the Braids Cabal minion, the Avaricious Dragon, the Kalia of the Vast, these things that I wanted to be so strong aren't playing that way. They feel sucky to play. And often that boils down to like, how do they stack up against removal? And so my goal personally, as I made that table, was to kind of think through the implications of removal versus threats. But then as I wrote the article and knew that would be kind of more public facing, it's an opportunity to kind of align your thoughts. And my goal in putting that into a written form was just like to encourage other people who might feel the same way. We do have the technology. We have what it takes to understand what makes a threat feel satisfying to get removed. Or by contrast, what might be making your threats feel unsatisfying. I'm hoping, if nothing else from that article sticks in your mind, that table would be it, I hope.
Yeah, I think it's a really great table. Everyone go check
Well,
that out
thank you.
after.
Yeah. And it is in
And
the article. Yeah.
yes, which I will try to remember to link.
Awesome.
And let's jump into a pack one, pick one of the cube because this is a desert cube. It's 432 cards. So 18 card pack. I will read it off here. We have Expanded Anatomy, 3 mana colorless sorcery, lesson. Put 2/1 counters on target creature. It gains vigilance till end of turn. Slitherhead, which feels like something Indiana Jones would just grab and
Oh, yeah.
from the Temple of Doom and
Crawling around in the sewer. Yeah. It's holding the key inside its mouth and you have to reach in and it's gross. Yeah.
yeah. And that's a hybrid Golgari mana for a 1/1, but it has Scavenge 0. Then we have an island, plain simple island. We have Drake Haven, 2 and a blue, enchantment. Whenever you cycle or discard a card, you can pay 1 and create a 2/2 flying Drake. Environmental sciences, like we were talking about, great card, fixing, and for the lesson learned package. Nahiri's Wrath. Oh, this is a card that when I played Shadows over Innistrad Draft, I wanted to make so many times work, but it just
Hmm.
felt so hard to make it work.
Yeah.
It's 2 and a red, additional cost to cast it, discard X cards. So it doesn't do anything unless you discard cards. And then you deal damage equal to the total converted mana cost to each of X target creatures or planeswalkers, where X the amount that you discarded. So discard X, deal X to X thing. And then we have Judith, the Scourge Diva. 1 black red for a 2/2. Other creatures you control get +1/+0, and whenever a non-token creature control dies, do one to any target. Riveteers Requisitioners, 1 and a red for a 3/1. Blitz, 2 and a red, and when it dies, you get a treasure. Marchesa the Black Rose. Oh, this is a card that's really good. I had to cut it for my proliferate cube. It's just so
Mm.
strong. 1 blue, black, red, 3/3 dethrone. And whenever a creature you control with a 1 counter on it dies, return to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. You can do some nasty stuff with this card. The Underworld Cookbook, 1 mana, discard a card, create a food token, and you can also pay 4 and sacrifice it to return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. But there's no Asmarana, Marna, Nakaista, Nakulakar in this cube.
Oh, there is. She's just
Oh,
in
there
the
is?
she's in the hybrid section.
Oh, I forgot the hybrid. I kept missing to look at the hybrid section.
Hmm.
And then we have Cleaving Reaper, 3 black, 5/3 with flying and trample. That's a pretty good body. And you can pay 3 life to return from your graveyard to your hand, only if you had an angel or berserker enter under your control this turn. And then we have Forest, Birthing Pod, 3 and a Phyrexian Green artifact that you can pay 1 and a Phyrexian Green to sack a creature and get a creature that costs 1 more. Now that's a fun card. And Mockery of Nature, 9 mana Eldrazi Beast, but has a merge. And when you cast it, you can destroy an artifact or enchantment. Ruthless Coalblade, 1 and a black for a 2/1. It gets +2/+1 as long as opponent has 10 or less life. Tragic Fall, target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. Or Hellbent, -13/-13. Uncharted Haven, which is a land that enters tapped. You can choose a color, and you get that mana when you tap it. And Grenzo Dungeon Warden, which is one of my favorite weird commanders you can build around. X black red when it enters with X1 encounters. And you can put the bottom card of your library into your grave by paying 2 mana. And if it's a creature that has power less than Grenzo's, put it on the battlefield. Now, before we get into this pack, I have a question for you that's been burning on my
Mm.
mind. There's 3 Tragic Falls in the cube, and then there's Last Gasp, which is
Oh
strictly
yeah.
worse. Tell me about
Uh-huh.
this.
That is purely because I have the Thomas Baxa original Ravnica art in foil, and it is
Oh,
just simply the most metal card I've ever seen in my life. So it's pure art considerations there. In fact, I make maybe too many art considerations in this cube, but I love that art.
hey, if it brings you joy, that's what's important.
Hmm.
So, what do you think about this pack?
Well, we've got some big aspirations to live in the form of Birthing Pod and Marchesa, and to some extent, the Underworld Cookbook and Drakehaven. But then we've also got this thing that the cube is about, which is how do you mitigate the risks to your mana base? And so we've got environmental sciences to do that a little bit. We've got Uncharted Haven and then some basics. And we've also got a couple of black spells, which again come with less mana base risk. And so Tragic Fall is the highest floor in this pack. Like it has the highest chance of making your main deck and doing a lot to improve your main deck. At the same time, I could see picking environmental sciences over it if you expect that the rest of the table doesn't value learn very much. I think that Mascot Exhibition is one of the top finishers in this cube. And so, kind of pre planning to build around that, if I get it, is something I like. So, I'm probably on Tragic Fall. If I'm feeling like I want to live the dream, then I could probably pick Birthing Pod and be quite happy.
Mascot Exhibition had to be one of my most annoying cards ever to play against in Limited.
Hmm.
They
It
just
is.
always had it, and it's so powerful.
It's pretty strong. Here I think you have to do a little bit of honest work for it, which is picking a learn card, picking the basics to play your learn card, and also getting the mascot exhibition.
Yeah.
And then during gameplay, it's like maybe you drafted it, but maybe you actually need to learn for your environmental sciences to fix your mana. So that's the hope, at least.
I'm looking at Cleaving Reaper here. I don't know if that's what you're looking at, but this card just seems like a really powerful creature. 5/3
Hmm.
flying trample for 5. It keeps me in black, and it comes back from the grave potentially, and I can keep recasting it by paying life.
Yes, and there are a fair few number of angels and berserkers to kind of enable that. It's also like not an embarrassing reanimation threat, if you're in a pinch.
5 power flyer is good. Trample
Yeah.
is strong. But yeah, Birthing Pod is such a fun looking birth around. Such a fun build Such a fun looking build around. And Drakehaven wheeling the Underworld cookbook sounds really fun too.
Mm,
I think I'm on the Cleaving Reaper though. That just seems like a
totally
great threat.
respectable. Yeah. I think I'm on Tragic Fall, but I could totally be convinced to go for Birthing Pod.
And then we're already both of us taking from this pack, cutting most of the black, like we were saying. The black goes by fast here.
Hmm. So at that point, the goal becomes how do you splash black, or depending, how do you splash other colors into your deck? How do you kind of bridge those gaps? Something we didn't touch on is that there are slightly more black aligned fixing lands than there are for other colors pairs. So I think it's likely that even if mono black or base black isn't open, we'll still be able to play those spells.
Yeah, sounds great. And Parker, it's been awesome having you on the show. Would love to have you on in the future.
Thank
Anything
you,
you want to
Ian.
say before we wrap up here?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. I had a great time. And of course, I'm happy to come back. If you are interested in learning more about Pulp Nouveau, you can find that article on luckypaper.co, or you can reach out to me on Blue Sky, Parker at luckypaper.co. Yeah, that's probably the best two places to find out more about this cube.
I've honestly never even opened Blue Sky. I just have no interest.
Well, I'm also on Discord. I'm in the Cube Talk Discord. I can be reached as Parker on that Discord. Also happy to chat about it there.
I've become so disillusioned to social media.
It's a tough scene out there, really quite grim. But my desire to talk about Cube with other people outweighs my dislike for social media so far. We'll see how things develop in the future, but for now, I'm hanging in there with my Cube Talk buddies.
That's great. And thank you all for listening. Please like, subscribe, follow, and stay tuned for more episodes of Cuberviews coming to you soon.
Thanks, Ian. This was a delight.